Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mythic Dungeon International. This is going to be the final week for the Eastern region and the final show before our LAN. I'm Jack, and joining me to catch all the action is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. And this is it. We're going to be able to see which teams from the East are going to be joining their Western counterparts for the LAN here. Big points are on the line with this tournament, as well as verifying who is going to be the top 4 teams from the East to join the West at LAN here. No surprise to see Team D and Battle for Champion tied for points here at the top, as they've been going back and forth between winning the first and second weeks of the tournament. But Buff War, Accompany, and Black Mamba both have the ability to be able to make it to LAN this weekend here, depending on where they're going to be finishing. And as we're taking a look at brackets, both of those 3 teams, Salute, have a lot of potential to be able to come into this tournament and prove a lot based off what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they're going to prove something, because we've seen just the same story week after week with these 3 teams. They're just very Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. There's a lot of inconsistencies with their play coming in and out of maps, and even throughout the series themselves, whether it's the lower or upper brackets. So, I mean, everything's on the table now, so we're going to see what they turn up this week.
Without a doubt, and Battle for Champion is going to get a bye, so we'll see them a little bit later in the upper semis. But our first game of the day, we will be looking at Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and Big Money Crab going into this one. And we haven't seen anything at a Big Money Crab yet, Sours.
That's right. It's an OCE deathmatch. It's the last OCE team versus Taiwan, which is technically OCE still. And they're going to be going head-to-head. And Big Money Crab has been trying really hard to make it into the broadcast of those last couple of weeks, but they finally did it.
That dedication is paid off here as Buff War, Nerf Rogue versus Big Money Crab. Going to be our first game, followed by Team D versus NGA, then Accompany versus Black Mambo, another rivalry we have going on the line to get those points for LAN, followed by the double upper semis, and then one elimination game to wrap up our day here. First game coming up on the line, Buff War, Nerf Rogue. We've seen some good performances by them, Nagura, but again, as Sloot mentioned, kind of that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where they really have kind of fallen flat at times that they shouldn't.
To be fair, I mean, this game should really not be hard for them. I definitely have my money here on Buff War and Nerf Rogue. They definitely should be winning against the Oceanic team. It's the first time they're qualifying. We've seen a lot of times that if you qualify later and then you're playing against a team that has been there all the time, so usually your chances aren't that good because of, the other teams just have more practice, they're veterans and so on. And then Big Money Crab, when you compare time trial times, there's just a big difference between those 2 teams. It's, I believe, almost 7 minutes between them in a Tolagor. So I do think Buff War and Nerf Rogue are going to have an easy time here.
No big money on the Crab on this one. But you mentioned Tolagor. That's going to be our first match of the series, first game of the series going into this one. Fortified, Raging, and Explosive. Sloot, what are you making of this one?
All right, sure, Mr. Krabs. I mean, Raging is just, it can get out of hand in this dungeon, but, no matter what kind of affixes we throw, and we've seen some pretty nasty one in past weeks, Explosive certainly ups the ante just a bit for the players. Once you get to the cannon area, Explosive, you can line of sight it. It's not a big deal. The real difficulty that players have had that we've seen consistently is just House Room, the second boss. They just, whether it be Sanguine, Explosive, just missing interrupts, pulling too many mobs with Raging. So I think, if anything, that's what's going to give teams a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and I think at this point, Sour's kind of nodding in on that one. Maybe some of the casters as well have been such a thorn in the side of these groups, the Salt Blasts.
Oh yeah, just teams not getting kicks, teams not doing a good job crowd controlling mobs to the best of their ability, doing a poor job line of sighting certain things and getting in combos if they shouldn't. It's been really like a plague in Tolagor that it shouldn't have ever have happened, or we've even seen deaths on the first boss in the last cup. It's a dungeon that should be fairly straightforward, but it always finds a way to wipe these teams.
And we'll have to be watching that very closely as we're going into game 1 here. If you'd like to vote on who you think will take the series, be sure to vote #BW or #BMC on this one as we go into game 1 on Tolagor.
Tolagor, I mean, what can we say about this dungeon? It's usually, on live keys, Nagura, you look at this dungeon, you're like, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
We got the cannons. You really only worry about Korgus there, of course, the final boss on Tyrannical, but these teams just have so much struggle with the Just Hallis Room, so we'll have to see what they do as both teams right out the gate. No surprise, of course, seeing the double rogue comp here, getting that mass stealth up right away and heading over to the Sand Queen.
I'm actually a little bit disappointed that we don't see something special comp-wise coming out of Big Money Crab, because in the time trials they actually played Hunter and Demon Hunter, which we don't see at all, basically. basically. So a bit disappointed because usually Toligor is one of those dungeons where you see different classes come out, if at all. We saw Elemental Shamans, we saw Mages. So, both of them playing normal comp, so let's see how they're doing. We see Big Money Crab actually just deciding not to pull the Sand Queen here, just dealing with some trash first, which is usually a live strategy that happens on live servers a lot.
Yeah, especially you try to kind of make room, really.
Yeah.
Just trying to account for some error that players might get a bit too close to that trash and proxy pull it by accident. But Big Money Crab certainly already starting to move pretty slow as they grab the parasites that patrol nearby as well. 66% on the Sand Queen already. We do have that Bloodlust rolling for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, which teams often save after that first upheaval. Here come this first, the next set of sand traps as the players do well to group together and make sure that they localize them, making it easier for the tank to pick up, but also minimizing the area that they need. This is really the kind of 3-point strategy that you need to make sure that you don't accidentally pull the crabs that Big Money Crab has dealt with.
Yeah, interesting that Big Money Crab is trying to do the trash first, and then they pull the boss, but they still use the Bloodlust at the start. So usually when you don't pull trash on top of the boss, you save your Bloodlust before or after the first upheaval, because the boss of course is not attackable while she's borrowed. So usually they want to save the Bloodlust when she comes back up, but Big Money Crab just deciding to use the Bloodlust on pull anyway, while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue already in 20% of course since they pulled the boss straight away.
Yeah, this kind of really starts to show perhaps some of the experience of the teams that we've seen at the tournaments. I mean, exactly like you're saying, you just waste, I think, about 15 seconds worth of Bloodlust uptime by lusting right as you pull the boss, and that upheaval hits about 20 seconds later. So not working out so well for Big Money Crab as they find themselves 5% on trash right now, only halfway done with the Sand Queen as she hits 50%. Sand Queen about to fall here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. 1% now for them as they finally open up the sewer grate, getting ready to move through the jail itself.
Yeah, very interesting to see what Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is going to do in this dungeon, because they actually had a very fast time in time trials. Even though they only managed to get third place in time trials, they still had 15 minutes and 9 seconds, which is incredibly fast for a Toligor. So we'll see what they do here. As we can see the Shroud come out, we see some skips, now probably a Shadow Melt, there we go. And now they're going to open some cages. I don't think there's any trash that they're going to be pulling here. They most likely just skip it with Double Sab and then go up into Jess Howlis' room.
Yeah, we usually see teams try to kind of proc their first reaping somewhere around Jess Howlis with the 20%. We've seen some strats with Method and A, I think, as well, that they've dealt with their second reaping near that area. So they're just going for a more cannon-heavy strat, from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, as indeed they do pop the Shroud and head right past the Soul Speaker trash, get the Arsonist sapped as well, which of course is that true CC, so you can kind of run right through the mob and not aggro it. Ching just takes a little look around the corner, making sure nothing got pulled as they prepare to deal with the trash on Jess Howler's floor. They did actually pull the Arsonist from behind them, needing it for their precious percentage to make sure that they pop that first reaping at the right time.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like they're going to be pulling the boss through the wall on the left side, which we've seen sometimes from teams. But I feel like 99% of the time when teams try to do a sneaky strategy, they end up wiping. So Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue choosing not to pull the boss here. They just threw the trash first. They did have the trinket, the cheat death trinket, actually proc on their warrior, so that's not going to be available for a while.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking at too. I mean, the very first pull, this is exactly what we talked about right before the map, is the danger of the Salt Blast from those C speakers. And the very first cast went through and immediately demolished Ching on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, depleting his Bonsomni's Bargain trinkets. Is not going to have that available indeed for 6 minutes, as Nagura mentioned. So just unfortunate use of it, as the tank over for Big Money Crab has fallen. I think on purpose though. He's the one who helped them skip by the trash leading out of the sewers up here to the floor with all the jailed buffs. So they're going to have to go upstairs, and then they will likely res him. Now we've seen some other teams in the West do a similar strategy. The tank just stays dead and you res him 1 to 2 floors up, just because of the vertical nature of the dungeon and the mass range of that mass res. So here comes the res on them, and they'll be prepared to go to the floor that Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is now at 14% trash on.
Yeah, so this is one of the only couple of trash packs that teams are going to have to deal with without the cannons, and then you can actually see how difficult it is to deal with those kind of mobs when it's raging. So there we go, the tank goes down. There's just a couple of arsonists and other difficult mobs that just do a lot of tank damage, and then when they all go into raging at the very same time, the dots from the arsonist tick for more damage, the C speakers, all the other casts do more damage. So this is why we see everyone go down here. We see Tomboyo, one of the rogues, actually having a debuff from the arsonist and almost dying there because the arsonist went into raging as well.
Yeah, did indeed proc that cheat death, and I guess Ching just didn't get the the taunt on them. Tanks do have, the warrior tanks, excuse me, do have 2 taunts. You can have your regular taunt and then reset it with that heroic leap. So he didn't manage to do that, and the Arsonist did indeed deplete that cheat death on Tomboy. But nonetheless, on they go to Jess Hallis right now, along with that first Reaping Wave, which I've actually seen cause a lot of problems on tank. If they push Jess Hallis to that 70% threshold and the tank gets stuns, they just start to accrue so many of those Reaping Soul stacks on them. But the team does well here to just make sure that they kind of destroy all that trash before pushing Jess Hallis to that second part of the encounter, where he will run around, open all the cages, and the players will join him on the other side of that grate there, and just make sure to line of sight the flashing daggers and get the multiple amount of interrupts needed on the encounter.
Yeah, so they did finish off the Reaping Waves right as the boss reached 70%. So well done by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. No problems at all with the Reaping Wave. Now we can see Jess Hallis opening those cages. Now you see explosive spawning as well while he's going around. But there's actually a lot of angles where you can line of sight, and explosive does not damage you if you're on line of sight. So that's what they're doing. They're going around making sure they're not getting hit by any of those explosives spawning in the back. And now when the boss is going to be in position, they're going to make sure that they get all the interrupts on Bobby and on the boss at the same time.
Yeah, so the boss has multiple interrupts, as does Bobby. Will actually stun a player until it's interrupted. Now, the big thing here is going to be making sure that they tend to the explosives well on top of it. There's no trash as they pre-cleared the floor. We do know we have that Raging Affix, as we mentioned earlier, that does increase trash damage by 100% once they go below that 30% threshold. And of course, we can see the teams babysitting all the explosives spawning everywhere, as 3 of them spawn, and one of them does go off and hits Tomboy. The rest of the team was line of sight here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, but they do manage to kind of escape any damage that would do, as Jess Hallis drops to 20% for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Big Money Crab only now dealing with their first Reaping Wave, haven't even pulled the boss yet.
Yeah, to be fair, Big Money Crab is playing everything a little bit slower, a little bit safer, and I'm not going to blame them for their strategy here because, again, in the time trials, they were 7 minutes slower compared to Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. So it's gonna be a tough game for them, a tough map for them. So just playing it safe and hoping for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue to make a mistake is probably the way to go for them. As their tank unfortunately goes down, they do have a Battle Rest available, so they might be able to recover, but one of the Windwalker dies as well. Their Rogue is very, very low, so they might have a problem here as the damage dealers just fall over and over.
Yeah, I mean, just huge problems coming in. Both Rogues have procced their cheat death, and the Windwalker is face planted on the ground. No Battle Res available for those 3 minutes right now, as the Windwalker just isn't able to contribute to the damage in there. I think there's actually still some Reaping Wave left over as well on top of the trash that they pulled. Finally, some of the water domes go out from the Sea Speakers. This is absolutely disastrous for Big Money Crab right now because they're not running any Blood Elves or offensive dispels right now. So if those water dome casts get out, there's a huge amount of absorb on all the trash surrounding it. So somebody missed their kick. Might have been the Windwalker, who of course can't kick because he's dead on the ground right now. So nothing but trouble here for Big Money Crab. So hopefully it does seem that they've managed to stabilize right now, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has run up to the next floor as quickly as possible, crowded all the trash in the gateway, and started their cannon barrage on them.
Yeah, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, no mistakes from them so far. We do see the cheat death proc from Marito here, but he's alive, of course. He's a rogue, so he's not going to die so quickly. But yeah, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is doing so much better. They're so much faster. They only had 1 tank death so far. A couple of cheat death procs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to die. So we see the rogues here in the cannons, of course, getting rid of the mobs and also with dealing with the Reaping Waves at the same time. They proc their 40% plus 60% Reaping. We see the tank go down, so they...
Oof.
Oh, we see the Rogue go down too, and down Rogue. This might be a full wipe as they don't have a Battle Rest.
I'm sorry, what were you saying about Rogue not dying so easily right now? As a full team wipe comes here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue right now. All those Risen Souls are just going to remain throughout that cannon area. They have an absolutely massive aggro radius, so the team, what they're going to try to do likely is try to run up as quickly as they can to that cannon, as opposed to fighting them one by one, and just try to resume. But you can already see the Risen Souls pouring through the door here for them, trying to recuperate right now, as Big Money Crab is dealing with Jess Hallis at 82%, dodging their first Flashing Draggers by line of sighting it on the side there behind the pillar, and they will be pushing that second phase. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue pretty substantially ahead at this point, and the death difference between the two teams only 3, but I mean, a bit of sloppiness, and you know, we were assuming it was going to be Jess's room, not the cannon area, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely. And this is what Big Money Crab is hoping for, right? They want Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue to make those mistakes. And let's be honest, Tolagor is one of those dungeons where we've seen a lot of teams have those huge wipes, have a lot of time lost. So Big Money Crab not out of the game here at all. There's definitely more things that Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue can lose time to. We've seen wipes on the last boss even multiple times. So everything open here still in this game. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, of course, back into the cannon area here, dealing with the rest of the trash. 73% on the board for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, as they will be proccing. I think
their 4th reaping with these 3 mobs, or at least very close to it. They're 74% right now, 76, so they should get the remaining 4% for the 80 from these this officer and, of course, the Marine on the side. So they'll be able to deal with that quite easily as they're already pre-positioned in the cannon area. Pretty fortunate with explosive spawns, too. They haven't really kind of gotten some of those annoying explosives in the middle of the way as the cannons disrupt the mobs. But the team does spawn the 4th reaping and runs over to the other opposite side corner to make sure that they can start working on the trash leading to the 3rd boss, but also on the left side, allowing the tank to kind of round up all of the reaping together so that once the trash is dealt with, the cannon can just turn 90 degrees to the left and deal with the grouped up reaping nicely. Big Money Crab now 18% on the board for Jess Howless as they look to line of sight that flashing dagger. Team is healthy and they look like they will be able to get through that encounter and start heading up to the cannons themselves.
Yeah, so explosives is actually kind of a problem here in the cannon area because if you are in the cannon, you're not immune to damage, so you can get hit by explosives. And the thing is with those full melee lineups, the melees can't be killing the explosives once the cannon engage them up. So if you get a little bit unlucky, bad RNG, and you have a bunch of explosives spawning, there's not really anyone who can kill the explosives because if you go close as a melee and killing them, then the cannon can't shoot or you're gonna die to the cannon. So definitely one thing to watch out for here in this cannon area are the explosives. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue are 92%, only have to deal with one more trash pack with the cannons after this boss, and they're already on 75% on Valyria here.
Yeah, so Valyria here should be no problem. Now, this fight is pretty mechanically, I don't want to say mechanically sound because it's not too complex, but certainly more complex than some other fights make it out to be. It does seem easy as the players go through it here, but it's a fight that can spiral out of control very quickly, depending on how well or poorly the barrels are managed. So she will direct her Cinder Flame and various other abilities to these barrels, making them explode and covering a huge portion of the room for area denial. So this is why you see the players kind of grouping them up in a corner. Now, what I don't like from the team right now is they're not pre-moving the boss to the corner. Okay, finally they do that. Good thing I'm on, of course, direct comms with them, telling them to do that. But it's important to do that because she's such a pain in the butt to move. So in a heavy melee comp, if you leave her in the middle of the room and she casts a Cinder Flame, it will cover a huge portion of the room. The players obviously need to get out of that area that's exploding, and so if you don't pre-move her in the corner, she's just going to sit there chain casting, and nobody will have access to DPS her. So well done here by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue at 30%. As Big Money Crab, I'm not really sure what they're doing. They're still very slow. Did they do the skip with like pulling it to the side and everything?
They died.
Oh, okay. So
they're trying to do the skip.
Yeah, the skip's not working out so well for them. Most teams, especially in this kind of race environment, just very aggressively run up to the cannon. They're trying to be a bit fancy here, if you will, and it's really starting to not work out for them.
Yeah, so they had a full team wipe coming in, trying to do the skip. I'm not sure if they were basically still in combat. So the rogue was wanted to open the cage. They were still in combat somehow. I'm not sure if someone didn't get the shadow melt off or something else happened. And yeah, they were in combat, so all of them died. They had to reset. Everyone had to release and try everything again. So definitely going to lose a lot of time here. They have to kill some of the trash that they didn't want to kill, that they wanted to skip. So they're going to be behind here, not even in the cannon area yet. While Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue dealt with Valyria, they deal with the last trash here. And let's be honest, if Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is watching the stream, they know that Big Money Crab is very far behind. So they can just deal with the trashy, they can deal with the reaping wave, they can just make sure everything's fine and then go to the last boss and kill it, and they're going to be fine.
Well, I mean, that's a tall task. The last boss is definitely the most dangerous thing in here. So we've seen a lot of teams have struggled with Corgus coming up in this tyrannical environment. It's really going to come down to how many doubles of chain explosive blasts they're going to get on the group, leading just immense amount of healings needed from Loda. So hopefully it works out for them. Might not, as the team does rush up right now. They have procced their 5th and final reaping wave, but they will likely shadow meld it off here in the corner. There could be a couple of mobs that leak past them, which they can, as you said, Nigger, just easily cleave down because they're under no pressure right now as Big Money Crab finally gets up to their cannon area and is only now starting to pull things together. But a lot of damage coming in on their Windwalker right now. 13% health on the board. One of the bleeds goes in as he does fall, and I'm not sure if he pulls something to the side to help them skip and will be res upstairs, but he is down right now. 9 deaths on the board for Big Money Crab, and they won't be able to get him up because he's out of line of... Oh, I thought he was out of line of sight with the battle res, but they do manage to get that up. But once again, no battle res for about 7 minutes now.
Yeah, all eyes on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as they have their 100% trash and pop their bloodlust here for the last boss, Corgus. Now they do have one battle rest available to them, but the only player who can't be rest is Loda. Of course, the rest to do it since he's the only one with the battle rest, so they want to make sure that he's the one who survives. Now this boss, we talked about it multiple times, a very healing intensive fight and also RNG heavy. If you do get a lot of double explosive bursts in a row, then you can be in trouble.
Yeah, a lot of trouble. As you can see, just one of them took the team so low as the first Deadeye shot goes in. Tomboy eats it for Loader there, just making sure that the healer's able to just sit there and turret healing because you are often knocked back by that Deadeye right now. Next round of explosives goes out, and an explosive itself spawns on the side. Loader dipping sub 50% right now, making sure the group is well hotted, healing over time up, getting them nice and healthy. Big Money Crab having a big struggle here right now as the Windwalker does fall yet again, but they are managing to clean up the rest of the trash here. Overseer Korgus for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue now sub 50%.
Okay, so they didn't get any doubles so far, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, a little not too bad RNG so far. Now the boss already on 40%. They do have a lot of single target damage, especially the tank doing a lot of single target damage. 21k DPS for work, quite a bit of DPS coming out here from Ching on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue side. And let's see this double. Okay, so now we have the first double coming out for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Let's see if Loda can heal the damage.
You know, there was almost a tone of excitement in your voice there, Nagura, as a very difficult moment came up for the team right now. Not really sure if you're cheering for the team or Overseer Korgus here. Nonetheless, they do manage to heal through it. Now, the first double, perhaps even 2 in a row, isn't too bad, Nagura, but it's once they start hitting too many in a row, you just start to run out of resources, and even mana starts to become an enemy for you. But at 14% now on the board for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they should be able to kill this boss. Frankly, even if the healer falls, they'll be able to just kind of whittle the boss down. So Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue right now, sub 10%, and they're looking to close out their first game.
Yeah, definitely. Very well played by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. They did have 6 steps, so a little bit of sloppy play, but in the end, they just played safe as they saw they were so far ahead. Now their time trial times was 15:09, and now they're 16:30, so still well played by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue.
I mean, they did have the full team wipe, so
yeah.
kind of goes against it,
yeah.
But 1-0 for them.
Yeah, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue taking it pretty convincingly in that first game, and really in this vein, no surprise going into this one. Sours, a much higher level seed, but much more experienced team in tournament play.
Yeah, Buff War, they took their time in this dungeon. They took time running slowly from trash pack to boss. They took their time running back to kill explosive orbs, and it often went really poorly for them. Buff War, on the other hand, they weren't waiting around for the other team at all. They flew right into the boss. They didn't do any trash in this first area. It's not even needed. And then they flew ahead. Big Money Crab, they were like not fast up to Jess Hallis. They were clean relatively up to Jess Hallis, and they did a pretty good job kind of, you know, maneuvering through the dungeon up to this point. But then explosives in the next hallway, it's funny because it's a hallway that we traditionally have seen teams just like skip as much as possible. They were fighting in the following hallway, and they ended up dying. And while Buff Warrior, you can see they ended up racking up quite a few deaths all the way up to the Knight Captain of Valyria to explosive orbs as well. They had already gotten a boss checkpoint, and they were so far ahead, and they had nothing to fear whatsoever, and they just claimed this map very convincingly. It'll be quite a battle in map 2 if Buff War's going to lose it.
Yeah, I think at that point it's going to be needing Big Money Crab to really step up on that next one. And at this point, I mean, we did have Fortified as well instead of the usual Tyrannical we've seen a number of different times on Toldagor. So at that point, it made things a lot easier for the team, especially because Korgus is so much less deadly in Fortified.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that if the boss fight is so much shorter, you can just tell, you know, you less chance of doubles, everything does a little bit less damage, and the trash, we talked about it multiple times. Trash is not a big deal because you don't have to kill the trash yourself. The cannons are dealing with the trash for you. So definitely a lot easier when you don't have this tyrannical in this dungeon.
I mean, now that Big Money Crab is down 1, they're going to need to be able to get back into it on Underrot. So don't go anywhere, guys. Game 2 coming up on the other side of this break. Buff War up 1 against Big Money Crab as we're about to dive right into the Underrot here with Tyrannical, Teeming, and Grievous Hours. This one doesn't look like it's going to be overly threatening. Maybe second, maybe last boss have to deal with Grievous a little bit more. But for a team as experienced as Buff War, it shouldn't be too much of an issue.
I'm almost a little bit afraid of Tyrannical first boss for Big Money Crab. I think it could be Snip Snip. It could be the end of them on the first boss. And then they could bleed out to Grievous during Trash during the final boss. They're going to have to show us their game faces here.
Without a doubt. And, I mean, second boss room salute has always been a pressure point for a lot of teams here with so much trash, so many mobs casting different abilities there. Being able to make sure you're shutting them down properly has been a big thorn in the side of a lot of teams on 19.
Yeah, it's been a problem, especially now that we're moving to teaming. You're just limited by the swarmers that you can pull really in there. And it's going to be, you know, these teams need to be aggressive. Well, I mean, hopefully be aggressive. We saw Big Money Crab just play it way too safe in the past map. And that room is just going to be very, very limiting for them before moving on to Kragmaw. So we'll see just how big they intend to pull.
Yeah, and at that point, I mean, I think that has been the area so many teams have been dying to. And for a team like Big Money Crab, this is kind of like their debut onto the stage. Sours mentioned that they've been trying to actually qualify for the tournament for a pretty long time here in Nagura. So, it might just be that they're kind of focusing a little bit on later maps or maybe lower bracket if they're going against an experienced team. But at some point, they're going to have to really show up.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, we've seen that before from some teams that they didn't really focus on their first game, because how do brackets turn out if you have to play against the first team as the number 8 seed or the third team as the number 7 seed? You might as well just, focus more on the lower bracket and just kind of assume that you're going to lose. That might be the case for them. I'm not sure. We will see how it goes for them in Underrod. But yeah, especially with the Grievous affix in Underrod on a tyrannical setting, there's some tough bosses, especially Krogma. If you have the Grievous affix, it's just, on the tantrum, so much to heal. So we'll see how those two teams are going to do.
Last week, I believe for the West, we had Quaking in Underrod. Would you rather have Quaking or Grievous on Nigra?
Probably Grievous over Quaking.
Really?
Probably.
Dude, Quaking can come whenever you're just so low and you're trying to be able to top everybody off. It comes to just ruin.
Chat believes, okay? Chat believes in the Big Money Crab.
All right, well, get your crab claws ready here as we're going into game 2 between a Big Money Crab and Buffor Nerf Rogue.
Nice little healer exchange there. Healer brains.
Wow.
Affixes and stuff. But I'm not too worried about Grievous affix on the first few bosses. But maybe the tantrum sure can snowball into it. But a lot of the damage, especially on the first boss, is just burst damage. I mean, if you're going to get hit by it, you're probably dead and not snowballing. But certainly the second, third to a certain extent, and fourth boss, I'm worried about the Grievous there with, I'm down to A-bomb. But we'll have to see when we get there. As Big Money Crab, really aggressive pull here at the start. We got ticks, we got maggots, we got everything in there. Huge amounts of damage coming on the group right now. Struggling to heal through it. It's the HP just shoots up for Froggy right now, trying to stabilize. Frontal on him as he gets rooted by one of the headhunters. Unlucky combo there. Really didn't work out for them. Got rooted, and nobody decided to interrupt the frontal on the maggot, so he was stuck in that rotten bile. Chain cast as he was rooted in place. Finally, the trinket procs here for Tagorian, the tank, and he does go down. Big Papa follows suit. Rogues have not yet procced their cheat death, but there goes Rick Axe's cheat death, and Malarkey as well, as they're about to fall. So huge slop fest coming in here from Big Money Crab off the pull, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has not only not popped their Bloodlust, they're 12% on the board and have dealt with their first pull.
Okay, so this is not going too well for Big Money Crab here, unfortunately. One thing to note here that they did change up their setup. Instead of the Windwalker, they are running the DK, the Big Papa, of course. Now, this very first pull not going too well. They didn't pop their Bloodlust. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe they should have used their Bloodlust to make sure they down this first pull here. Now, one thing to note, though, that the Mega Cast, that's really not something that should be going through. You can't really blame the healer here for dying to that frontal, because that Mega Cast should be interrupted by probably one of the rogues.
Yeah, I mean, usually just one rogue can cover it. They have two of them there, so they were just too distracted doing whatever they were doing, just huge amounts of damage, I suppose, in the meantime, and then just kind of lost sight of what was going on, or it wasn't communicated properly. I mean, poor Froggy probably saw his life flashing before his eyes. He was rooted. He saw the entire rotten bile cast going through it. He was just yelling at them to do something, or maybe he wasn't, and that's part of the problem. But as we've seen with other teams here, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has procced their first Reaping and have headed over to Elder Liaxa right now. First Spell Reflect in there well from Ching BB, making sure that they get as much of that damage reflected back onto the boss as possible, as the first Reaping Wave parades in on the team right now, and they're going to have to do really well, not only to dodge the Shadow Smashes, but we do have that first Blood Effigy spawning here, so interrupts have to be on point.
Yes, definitely, especially when the whole Reaping Wave is around here. And of course, all of those interrupts are melee interrupts. You don't have any range kick coming through from these teams. So if you have a Smash spawning on the ground or a green pool spawning and you need to interrupt the boss or the effigy at the same time, you definitely want to make sure you have something ready to do so anyway. Because if one of those Blood Bowls gets through, that's definitely going to be deadly for the tank if he doesn't have a big cooldown ready or something like Spell Reflect, of course.
Yes, the Tormented Soul just left there on the side right now as Liaxa is at 33%, so really masterfully done here by Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Only one death on the board, so a bit of a scattered death, but they have managed to well deal with their first Reaping Wave, deal with the Blood Effigy as well, not let a single cast go through, and they will be downing the boss here in a moment. Probably going to have one more Blood Mirror cast. Yep, and there it is for them right now. They could probably just interrupt the ad on the side and finish the fight up on the boss, which is what looks like they're going to do, especially if they time a good Spell Reflect from the boss. Big Money Crab making the big money plays here as well as they proc their first Reaping and head over to Liaxa as well. First Blood Effigy is down, so hopefully they can clean it up compared to the first pull that we saw. About 13 seconds left on their Bloodlust right now as the Reaping does start to fall. Interrupts seem to be well handled at the moment by the team.
Yeah, Big Money Crab definitely has an opportunity to get back into the game here. We've seen Unholy DKs be played a lot in this dungeon here in general, so we might see some greater pulls later on in the dungeon just because of this DK. But one thing to note as well, good on them that they're actually going to do bigger pulls here. They're pulling a Reaping on top of the boss. They did a very huge first pull, even if it didn't work out that well for them. But they're risking things compared to the Tolagori, where they're just playing everything slowly and safe. And this time around, in this Underworld, they're actually risking some things and doing bigger pulls.
Yeah, they're risking things and doing bigger pulls, but they're doing it sloppily, unfortunately. I mean, they have had 0 deaths on the board during this pull, but once one of the Lost Souls died, the green swirlies went out, those hand swirlies, and both Rogues and the Warrior were hit by it, which does a fair bit of damage, but also debuffs you for that 30-second, 10% damage decrease. They didn't have any cloaks available, so the players were just stuck doing less damage for really just a silly reason. 19% now for Elderly Axa as the second Blood Mirror cast the next Blood Mirror cast will be casting soon. And Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue now in Kragmaw's room. Now, this is the room we said was going to be very dangerous, especially with teaming. A lot of babysitting needed here with that teaming affix, especially if you pull some of the Swarmers.
Yeah, so the one reason why this comp is so good for this room specifically is because you have 2 Rogues. Now, 2 Rogues are just so good for a lot of mobs here. You need to interrupt the Maggot's frontal, which we've seen the rest of Druid in Big Money Crab die to earlier. And then you also have a lot of other abilities that need to be interrupted. You have the Blood Swarmer who fixates, who needs to be stunned if the player that is fixated is in danger of dying. You also need to interrupt the Lashers, and you need to interrupt a bunch of other casts. So the Rogues just have so many interrupts, so many single target stuns, and other abilities like Gouge to interrupt those kind of casts, that they just shine in this kind of area.
You can see just how much damage those Swarmers do, as well as Tomboy was just chunking in health there from those shadow hits in as he was fixated. A lot of damage on the tank as well. Ching, of course, backing it up there, making sure to stay out of range of the mobs when he's starting to dip too low, as Loda had to pay attention not only to the tank, but also the fixated target from the Swarmer. Big Money Crab has as well moved into Kragmaw's room, doing their own fairly large pull here. Not as much damage as I would have hoped coming out of that Unholy DK right now. Is actually below one of the Rogues, who themselves are doing a fair bit of damage as they clean up the rest of these ooey gooeys, pull another Maggot, and one of the Swarmers in as well, making sure to tend to it before it fixates. A lot of damage coming in on the tank, though. Does not have that Bon Zombie's Trinket bargain available, as he does do an Intimidating Shout. Might be running the trade, of course, to get that Absorb with that Intimidating Shout, so could have used it defensively there or as an interrupt, but nonetheless, they do manage to stabilize, as Buff Warrior Nerf right now has pulled another Swarmer, a ton of mobs, and definitely, I'm pretty sure we'll be proccing their 3rd Reaping Wave here.
Yeah, we'll see what they decide to do with the Reaping Wave. Usually we see the Reaping Wave be pulled on more trash or be pulled on top of the boss. Now, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just has to finish up those last Living Rods. Usually the Living Rods are the least dangerous mobs here, but they do have the most HP, so that's why they usually die last. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue are engaging Kragmaw here with their 60% Reaping Wave. They don't have their Bloodlust available to them, and as I mentioned earlier, this is one of those bosses that is pretty scary on a tyrannical setting, especially if you have Grievous. But let's see how Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue deals with this fight.
Yeah, so doing well to dispel all of those Reaping stacks from the Risen Souls on top of the tank right now, as they all pretty much finish off the rest of the Reaping and run over through one of Kragmaw's charges right now to stomp the ticks. We do know, of course, Kragmaw's 3 abilities do spawn little ticks that you need to stomp before they turn into full-fledged adds that, well, of course, deal a ton of damage to the tank and explode on death, dealing shadow damage to the group. Last thing you want in this Grievous environment with Tantrum coming up, which, speaking of, is about to come up right now. So the healer needs to usually well prepare for this. The problem is the group's very spread out. You can't really get an effective Efflorescence against all the group because they're just running all over the place dealing with ticks. So let's see how Loda handles it right now.
Yeah, and one problem as well is once the Tantrum damage is over, the healer still needs to heal up the people to full HP just to get rid of the Grievous. But when the Tantrum is over, the tank will immediately get damage from the boss and drop very low. So the healer can't really focus completely on the tank damage because the tank will also be low from the Tantrum. He needs to heal up his group to make sure to get rid of those Grievous stacks. So definitely want to keep an eye on the tank's HP right after the Tantrum, see how the healers are handling with this. And usually Prod Warriors are not the best for Grievous because they don't have that much self-healing compared to other tanks like Blood Decayers or something like that. So once they drop to those 4 stacks of Grievous, they do have a hard time to get rid of them if the healer doesn't spam a lot of healing onto them.
Yeah, they actually pretty much have 0 self-healing outside of kind of trying to ease some of the damage with that Ignore Pain, but they have no way to effectively raise their health without those Victory Rush procs, which are just not available here. There's no other adds around that they're killing. There's no Reaping, nothing. So Ching dropping to that 2 stack right now, 33%. He started getting meleeed by the boss. Now, one of the little takes, unfortunately, did spawn on the side. They did miss that stomp. Shouldn't be too big of a deal for them as he does back up for the indigestion, making sure not to get hit by it, charging back in as we've seen most of the tanks this tournament do. You can't eat the hit to the face, but there's really no reason to. It's just a huge amount of that shadow damage coming in. 32% on the board for them and 62% trash as the next Tantrum wave goes on. Big Money Crab, just like the last map, had a bit of a hiccup at the start, but slow and steady are trying to catch up as they've hit 54% on trash and will be proccing their 3rd Reaping soon.
So one thing to note about Kragma as well is that in between the tantrums, his abilities are random. It could start with a charge or it could start with a frontal. Now, if the boss starts with a frontal, then the time in between the tantrums is shorter than if he starts with a charge. Because if he starts with a charge, he does 2 charges and 1 frontal. If he starts with a frontal, he does 1 charge and 1 frontal. So this time around, they're actually being lucky and they get a charge first, meaning they have more time before the next tantrum starts.
Yeah, and certainly just more time to DPS and not have to worry about anybody dying or tick spawning or stomping. So fortunate working out for them. And you know, they were pretty fortunate in the last map with Corgus as well. Even though we were in that fortified environment, I think they only had 1 double on Tol de Gore. So it seems that the luck aura is with them today as Kragma is about to fall here at 1%, and they will be rushing over to, of course, get started on the Guardian packs along with the pasta factory, as we call it, with the nope ropes and the hazard spaghettis.
Okay. Okay, we see a shot coming out here as they self-pass these mobs. They're either going to do a bigger pull because we don't really see teams skip these skeleton packs because they just give a lot of count and they're very efficient to kill. So we see them pull the spaghetti noodle, as Settles likes to say, with the 2 skeleton packs on top of each other. Now, one thing to watch out for here is, of course, you need to interrupt the danger noodle because it constantly casts an AoE bolt that if it's not interrupted, it goes through, does a lot of AoE damage to everybody and applies the dot 2. And then you also have the death speakers, which constantly need to be interrupted because they do a raised death cast, summoning another guardian if it's not interrupted. And they also cast a wicked frenzy, enraging one of the skeletons around them, dealing a lot of damage to the tank if it goes through.
Yeah, it's something you spell reflect, of course, with that Prot or dispel, but it's just, and soothe it, not to mention as well on the rest of Druid. So certainly something that this comp particularly can handle well, but there's just no reason to stress the healer or the tank out if they could just easily interrupt it with gouges, stuns, etc., disorients, whatever they may have. Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue now up to 72% trash as they look to try and complete their 80% in order to pull it into Spore Caller Zoncha, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Big Money Crab, still slow and steady, has proc their 3rd Reaping and is working on Kragma themselves right now as it hits the 60% mark.
Yeah, so so we see 1 death coming in for Big Money Crab as they did proc, as they are fighting on Kragma here. They do have a battle rest ready for them, so they did recover here as Big Papa going down, unfortunately. So Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue, proc their Reaping Wave, and they're engaging Spore Caller here. Now, this is actually a pretty difficult pull as there's so many things going on at the very same time. Spore Caller does do a lot of tank damage, and on top of that, you also have the Reaping mobs that you need to tank, and you have all those area of denial effects spawning from the Reaping mobs. So this is definitely a dangerous moment here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue.
This is just a kind of a nightmare here for Big Money Crab right now. The tank is just not picking up the ticks that they've spawned by not stomping them, and then just keep chewing into the Big Papa. And I do want for you to notice, Nigger, it's not Big Papa, it's the Big Papa. He's the biggest Papa of them all right now, and he had the biggest deaths of them all too, as they did have to use the battle res on him. But yeah, I mean, just really sloppy play from the tank. I mean, unfortunately the team, didn't clean up the ticks, but he's just letting it melee on Big Papa right there, accruing those Grievous stacks as well. Just made it a nightmare for the healer to heal through as they do start the next round of Tantrum right now, 40% on the board. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, though, here on the main screen, of course, not to be forgotten, 64% right now, have, as we've seen other teams do, dealt very well with their 4th Reaping and are chewing through Spore Caller Zoncha.
Yeah, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue did a very good job to deal with the Reaping Wave here and Spore Caller as well. Now, one thing to note here on Spore Caller, especially if they run a setup like Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is running, then it really should not be a big deal to deal with the main mechanic, which is the mushrooms, because you just have double cloak to soak any of the mushrooms in case you didn't manage to soak it with the upheaval or the shockwave, and then you also have a disease dispel by the Windwalker monk. So in case you run out of immunities, you can just have a dispel from the Windwalker come in, which he doesn't even use because it's a global, I guess.
You don't want to lose some of that damage. A team doing well to move around in this small space where you don't really have much room to move around. Now, we do see, of course, the Festering Harvest cast here from Spore Caller Zoncha again at 100%, finally clearing the room, or making sure that players clear the room, and the tank moving just slightly away as he does still melee during that cast deceivingly. So you can actually get smacked pretty easily as the tank. Upheaval doing well there by Morito Dwarf to make sure that he starts cleaning the next wave of mushrooms. They'll probably have at least one more. Ching, though, eating some of the mushrooms to the face right now, just can't get out of this 4-stack of Grievous. Finally gets healed over that 90% threshold from Lota and turns the boss again so that he can get another shockwave cast into some of the mushrooms. 5% here on Kragmaw. Big Money Crab is about to finish with that boss and move on to the Guardians themselves.
Yeah, they actually very well done by Froggy here, as he did have his Innervate ready again. He used it as a very first tantrum, and now he got it back up for the very last tantrum here because he was completely out of mana. So if he didn't time his Innervate correctly here and to actually get off 2 Innervates, he probably wasn't able to heal this last tantrum. So well done by the rest of it here by Big Money Crab, as Buff Winner Rogue is about to kill Sporkal Essentia.
You know, I kind of feel for Froggy there because I was watching them while you were just casting there for Zancha, and every time he put an Efflorescence down, the team would just move right out of it within 2 seconds, and he kept putting it down and they kept moving right out of it. So that could be quite frustrating, I imagine, for the healer. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has down Sporkal Zancha here and is stealthed over to the next round of Guardians, which I expect that they'll pull with some of the Corrupted on the side and perhaps the Defiler as well. Usually a fairly large pull is done here by the teams now. We do have one of those delicious Danger Noodles on the side in the teaming affix here, so they decide to group up the Guardian, and here comes indeed the Corruptor and the Defiler on top of it. It's a lot of damage that's going to come in on the tank, and a lot of babysitting needed in terms of interrupts on that Defiler, at least to 2-person rotation.
Yeah, that's a fairly difficult pull. We usually see the Danger Noodle go down first and then pull the Corruptor on top, because this Corruptor is spawning those tentacles, as you can see in the 4, and also doing the frontal fear that you need to dodge out of. As you see, the Cheat Death actually proccing from Tomboya here, but he did recover. Now, one thing to know when you have this Corruptor on top, and you also need to interrupt the Danger Noodle, the Noodle doesn't move, right? It's just standing there and you can't move it anywhere. So if you have to interrupt it all the time and you get those tentacles spawning right next to it, you kind of have a problem, right? So this is why you usually see them killing the Noodle first and then pull the Corruptor on top. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue not having any deaths here, so well done by them.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you've never eaten pasta on a dish that started to move by itself on your plate. That would be really scary. So it makes sense that these Danger Noodles are rooted in place in the game right now. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is at 94%. We are in a teaming environment, though, let's not forget, which means more trash present in the dungeon, and you need to kill more trash to reach that 100. So not sure if they're actually going to hit 100 with the first Danger Noodle plus these 2 Corruptors here. I think they'll have to pull it over to the second one just because of the smaller trash count that you get. But we'll see here as a nice combo of Ursula's Vortex with Typhoon comes out of Lota there just to interrupt that maddening gaze from these Corruptors right now so the players don't get hit. And the team does well to move over from those tentacles, the Ayaya tentacles that spawn from the Abyssal Reach, so that you don't get slapped in the face with an immense amount of shadow damage. Something that actually contributed to Tomboy's Cheat Death proc earlier in the pack that just did 95% on the board for them. They've dealt with the Danger Noodle, are about to kill the 2 Corruptors. They haven't moved over to the Noodle up the hill as well, so I guess these are the final 2 that they need. Big Money Crab, 80% dealing with their Reaping on top of Zancha as well.
Yeah, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue proccing their Reaping Wave here 100%, as they need to wait until this door opens and then they can go down to the last boss room. The Reaping will teleport on top of them, so they will most likely pull the wave on top of the boss as to do save their Bloodlust as well for this very moment. Now, in theory, they could just play it safe and kill the Reaping by itself and then engage with the boss because they are so far ahead. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue does not care, and they are engaging the boss and using the Bloodlust as well.
Yep, they're just chewing through all these Lost Souls coming in, so a lot of tank version of ads from this Reaping Wave just by virtue of the type of mob that existed in this final Reaping Wave that they've procced. I'm having an Abomination, as we mentioned in previous weeks. Of course, you don't see that health decreasing. That's because the damage he takes actually increases his energy bar, and when he reaches 100 energy, you will spawn those 2 small blood effigies on the side. Each one you kill will deplete 1/6 of the boss's health, so once you chew through 3 waves of 2, you will be able to finish the encounter here, as Titan Keeper Hezrel will kind of aid you, getting you this holy aura on the ground that gets rid of the damage over time stacks that you accrue throughout the fight, and of course will help to kill those blood vestiges very easily as well.
Yeah, so this is one of those fights where you do get quite a bit of AoE damage because of those dots, as you mentioned, damage over time effects on the group. And on top of that, you also have Grievous, which makes this fight a little bit more difficult. But we see Lota dealing with it pretty well so far, and he also managed to get a little bit of damage in cat form as he did more than 20k DPS earlier, so very well done by Lota here, keeping everyone alive and also managing to do some damage on top of that. And as you can see, the Trank actually coming out here. Now, one thing you need to note here is that you want to definitely stack up whenever you see this circle going out here, just to get rid of those stacks. Now, the stacks are magic, so in theory you can dispel them, but the dispel has a cooldown, so you definitely just want to make sure you make use of the zone.
And just cost a bunch of mana that you unnecessarily need to use. Another important thing to note is that the warrior is substantially above everybody else's damage in the group right now, just taking advantage of that huge amount of Thunderclap plus the haste scaling that they get from the Bloodlust damage coming in with the mobs of the 5th Reaping Wave. So crazy amounts of damage that the Prot Warriors do. One of the main reasons you really see them so popular here. They're just able to support the group so much and help just kill things so much faster. Sport Caller's notched it down to 35% right now for Big Money Crab. Will take an absolute Christmas miracle for them to win this map at this point. They're just so far behind as Unbound Abomination has dealt with its they're waiting to spawn the last wave. They've dealt with the second wave of Blood Visages.
Yeah, Big Money Crab is way too far behind at this point. To be fair, they didn't have a lot of huge mistakes except on the very first pull where they lost a couple of people. Otherwise, they did have a death here and there, but they did have battle rests ready, so didn't lose too much time. So it's just their strategy, and everything else also just being a little bit slower. Maybe damage slower, less efficiency, worse strategy or worse route coming in for Big Money Crab here. So definitely need to improve a little bit if they want to win in the lower bracket. But let's be fair, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue also a very good team and a veteran team. As their Monk actually goes down as I say that.
Yeah, you gotta stop saying those things, otherwise it's gonna cost Team Des. Windwalker does go down, but no problem. They do have the battle reses available. And finally, Unbound Abomination goes down here as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue takes the first series 2-0 in the Underrod.
And at this point, this is what we expect out of Buff War. We want to be able to see them be that 3rd seed, maybe be a contender in that first, second place matchup, but not quite there yet. Convincing win, Sours, then quick move on in a 2-0.
Yeah, I want to agree a lot with what Nagura said about Big Money Crab, where in the second boss room, they weren't really pulling it away at all to capitalize on their Death Knight. Like, he was never really breaking even like 100,000, I don't think he ever got to. And it was just Buff War, they're doing this dungeon exactly as they've done it in previous broadcast weeks, going really well. And I'm so impressed. Big Money Crab was able to handle both of these bosses fairly well. We saw they were having issues even on the second boss where Taghorian wasn't properly clapping all of the ads, and it was causing Death Knight deaths, which is really kind of a mistake that you shouldn't have happening if you're able to make it to the stage. It's almost unacceptable in a lot of ways to be allowing that as a tank, as a DPS. It's not a good feeling to have people not being able to pick up threat like that. We've seen people rip threat in some really big Death Knight pulls, but having someone just have threat passively and the tank not being there to help their team is kind of like no good.
Especially when it's the Big Papa of all people that had to fall for this blunder.
I know, of all people, right? And so you know more than anybody what it takes to be the Big Papa on this one, right? And Sours, it kind of seemed from the beginning that Big Money Crab just was not able to put things together, and it really started off with that first pull.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that they had in their toolkit that they really didn't use that kind of went really poorly here. So you see this Fetid Maggot turns over to cast on Froggy, and he's netted. So this isn't just Froggy's death that fall here. He can shift out of that as a druid, so he can break himself out of that route and get out of there scotch-free. Not to mention that the team, they can Death Grip that cast. The Warrior has Stormbolt talented to stun that cast. He can Shockwave that cast. Rogues can gouge. Rogues can blind. There's a lot of things that they have in their toolkit to be able to avoid having a wipe like this at the beginning of the dungeon, but just sort of like a lack of coordination, a lack of communication can lead to not really using what new spells you have available, right? So part of what makes this team comp so good is all the utility that this meta comp has, and when you don't actually use that utility, it's kind of like defeats the purpose, I guess.
And at the same time, it also kind of just gets into your nerves a little bit, especially as this team is going to be fresh to the broadcast. So with Big Money Crab dropping down here, we are seeing Buff War Nerf Rogue moving on. And just a reminder is the standings that we're looking at right here, what is going to be on the line for them. Buff War Nerf Rogue is that 3rd seed right now, but they're not ahead by such a massive margin here. Abracadabra on the side of the West here, always kind of had that solid 3rd place spot locked down. Maybe could start moving on to the 2nd place, but with the West locked down, this is what we're looking at here. Buff War, A Company, Black Mamba here, Sloot. These are the 3 teams we've kind of always been looking at, always been searching around. And at this point, it's going to be kind of a game of who's most improved.
Yeah, and it's also going to be a game of who hits King's Rest first. The teams right now, but I mean, jokes aside, well, kind of semi-jokes aside, the reality is that these teams would perform well in the maps that you kind of expected, but as soon as something a bit too difficult was thrown their way, we even saw it from the 2 top teams in the East. It was just too much to handle. The King's Rest just absolutely destroyed the East last week. We all know about it. We all had a laugh about it, but it's something they do need to improve on because it's mistakes that a lot of the West teams just didn't make. Now, in the second day, we did see the redeeming of some of the top teams in the East being able to kind of do the King's Rest on the day 2 and do it well, but these 3 teams particularly have had just such on-off, hot-cold play throughout the 2 cups that we've seen, so it depends what maps are going to be thrown their way.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting as well how much practice these teams are going to be able to put into it, because we do have a little bit of reduced practice where teams will know a couple days just before the event as to what they'll be able to practice, but they also have the time trial maps here in Nagura, so some of their best games in some cases should be those maps they know from well over a week ago will be on the broadcast.
Yeah, so one thing to note about the less time they have to practice, I mean, they have 2 days to practice basically for all those maps, but usually when you're in the tournament, when you're in the first cup, in the second cup, and in the third cup, then Tyrannical or Fortified almost always stays the same, except in the Solagor that we had today. So that's one thing you don't have to prepare for. You don't have to prepare for Tyrannical and Fortified to switch. And otherwise, the affixes do switch, but usually, or sometimes rather, it doesn't really change your strategy too much. Some of those affixes, like Volcanic, they don't really change your strategy in any way. So sometimes you can just take your strategy from the previous week and just adjust it slightly, and it's still going to be the same. It's going to be good still. So you don't have to waste too much time on some of the dungeons.
A lot of it really isn't just about, I mean, we see it with Method EU especially, but even some of the Western teams period, it's not just about, being comfortable with not having to change too much. It's about innovating and pushing new packs and pushing new routes. I mean, we saw a wildly different strat coming out of Method EU. Actually, a lot of the West teams for Waycrest Manor this past Cup 3 compared to the first 2 Cups. So, it seems that these East teams haven't really done that since the first Cup that we've seen them in as much.
Yeah, I think Team D maybe was the one who stood out the most from just being able to improve, to be able to finally take down Battle for Champion in that regard. But overall, yeah, being able to see how they can improve and how they can start adjusting themselves here going into it, because Buff4 is going to be moving on into that upper semis bracket here, so we still got to be seeing a company versus Black Mamba, and then Team D and NGA face off to see who will be joining them in that upper semis here. And at the point, it's going to be a game of who is going to be improving, and with a bit of time before LAN comes up here, Sours, like we mentioned before, they're going to have some time to be able to adjust their strategies, maybe get a blueprint, but some affixes, I mean, especially Necrotic or Bursting, can really put a spanner in the works on them.
Yeah, with a lot of the affixes between weeks, you really don't have to change up that much between your strategies. Like, the really pressure point ones are maybe like bursting a little bit. Like, depends on the dungeon, really, whether or not bursting is really going to slow you down. But bolstering is a really huge one. And then explosive even as well are 2 affixes that, like, we're going to drastically change the routes you go through these dungeons with. But other than that, you should be able to have like a jack of all trades route prepared for just about every dungeon with, okay, maybe depending on the week, we can add a couple of more pools here or there, go a little bit bigger. It depends on how comfortable these players are with the dungeons, right? So in the past, a lot of like the East teams, OCE specifically, have really kind of used the time before the tournament to really practice to get good for the tournament. So, okay, here comes the tournament. Now we're going to do a lot of Mythic Plus. But I think the format this time around really benefits players who are putting a lot of time into this content outside of it. And I think it's a good thing, where it's good to be familiar with these dungeons at a level where you can say, okay, we're going to see a 19. I know what a 19 feels like. Okay, we're going to see it with these affixes. I know what these affixes feel like. Now I can strategize a good combination, a good route for this dungeon. Whereas some of these teams are coming into it completely with nothing, and they're like, oh my god, I don't have anything prepared for this. I've never done a 19 before. We just barely like time stuff. Like this is like, it can be very overwhelming if you're not used to this level of content. So I think that the players that are doing the best are showing it like inside and outside the game. I know that like it's different for seeing how the top Chinese teams are doing, because there's no Raider IO to look at them. But I know that some of the Team D players, I think, are doing like 24s in China, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, at that point, it's just going to be a very interesting look at, some of the teams we've seen from the West who have kind of historically been that team, or even, Eastern region we haven't really seen much out of Free Marcy at all in this season, but maybe something in the next season we're able to start building that up after LAN, because all those points are going to be very important towards it going to the global finals. So our next matchup is going to be a company versus Black Mamba. Now, if you'd like to place your vote in chat, be sure to use hashtag ACC or hashtag BM to place your vote on that one. After our first series of the day, Buff4 Nerf Rogue does take it from Big Money Crab and sending them down into that lower bracket here. Now we'll have a rematch between 2 teams vying for their LAN spot between a company and Black Mamba. Don't go anywhere. The Mythic Dungeon International will be returning just after this break.